What's up everyone? So in honor of my favorite show of all time, Game of Thrones, wrapping up its final season, I decided to make a list of my favorite sword fights from the show and compare them to sword fights from real life. If you haven't seen Game of Thrones, don't spoil it for yourself, you can come back to this video later. As for the real life sword fights, we're going to be using machete fights from the Dominican Republic. If you're interested in seeing more of those, check out the other videos on my channel. Now the main difference here is that the sword fights in Game of Thrones are of course fake and choreographed by people who probably have never seen a real sword fight, let alone fought in one. The machete fights on the other hand are very real, where there's a possibility of being maimed or killed. The other big difference is in the swords. In the Game of Thrones sword fights, they're typically using long swords, which are longer than machetes, as well as heavier and slower. Now for the first fight, we have everyone's favorite cutthroat,
the Bronn of the fucking Blackwater,
up against Knight of the Vale.
Bronn turns down the shield that's offered to him, even though he's virtually unarmored, while Ser Vardis, who's already head to toe in steel plate, takes up the shield as another layer of defense. Shields are definitely viable, putting something in between you and the sharp piece of metal flying at you is pretty instinctive. That's why plastic chairs and buckets are often used in the real sword fights of today. But choosing to use a shield is a matter of preference. Bronn's main strategy is to evade and avoid and deflect by striking at the back of his opponent's blade when he swings. This is a great strategy out in the open where you have a lot of freedom of movement. Bronn, however, is going upstairs backwards and has to mind the benches and other objects and almost gets pushed down the big hole in the middle of the room. Bronn bounces back and Ser Vardis keeps on swinging and missing. Bronn uses his environment to his advantage, kicking lamps and throwing bystanders. Not exactly honorable, but pretty realistic. Projectiles like bottles, bricks, and rocks are often used in modern sword fights as well. By this point, Ser Vardis is worn out and tired, so Bronn waits for him to swing and create an opening to strike at Ser Vardis where he's unarmored. The best opening is after a swing when your opponent's sword arm is extended. Then it looks like Bronn parries Ser Vardis so hard he turns 90 degrees to the right and gets cut behind the leg. The fight's pretty much over. Ser Vardis gives it one last go and charges in just to get tripped. All that armor couldn't save him. Ser Vardis Egan, you have a flight to catch. Bronn's strategy of waiting for his opponent to get tired and make a mistake works against an aggressive fighter. But if neither fighter wants to engage, you get a stalemate, which are pretty common. Next up we have
the Bloody Hound
versus 5 scumbag Lannister soldiers led by Polliver. The Hound starts the brawl by knocking over the table on Polliver, temporarily getting him out of the fight. He then hits the next guy with a mean left hook before cutting down his buddy, who unrealistically leaves himself open. The Hound blocked his sword, so for some reason, he felt the need to take a step forward and give the Hound his open back. If there's two things I've never seen in a real life sword fight that I see often on the show, it's one, what I like to call saber locking, where they push their swords together and try to overpower each other, and two, barehanded punches. Maybe both are viable in fights with long swords, but with light, fast, and agile machetes, strikes are coming as fast as they're going. No one's stopping their blades from flying to have a contest of strength mid-fight. As for punches, who's going to throw a punch when the objective is to cut your opponent and end the fight with your sword? Again, maybe against a long sword if a fighter gets too close for his opponent to adequately swing his sword, maybe his only option is to throw a punch. It takes a ballsy individual to close the distance in a sword fight. The Hound gets knocked to the ground, but luckily for him, the other guy's swords have butter on their handles, so instead of cutting him, they kick him a couple of times. The Hound blocks, then kicks and punches his way up. He overpowers them individually left and right, even stabbing one with his friend's own knife while still in his hand. Somehow, the same little guy manages to get on top of the Hound, only to get hit with one of the worst fatalities of the series. Damn, homie. Then Arya comes through with the cleanup. I really enjoy this fight scene, but is it realistic? Not really. All the punches and kicks look cool, but in the dozens of real life sword fights I've seen, I've never seen a punch or kick, not even once. For the final fight, we have young Ned Stark
Where's my sister?
and his gang, outnumbering the greatest swordsman of the series, Sir Arthur Dayne,
And now it begins.
and his boy, who easily has the most flamboyant sword draw of the series. Personally, I'm a fan of dual wielding two blades. I find it to be the optimal way to get an advantage over your opponent in a sword fight. Sir Arthur Dayne quickly cuts down one of Ned Stark's boys, and his partner does the same right before getting killed himself. Now what to do when outnumbered? In the last fight, The Hound had the option of taking on only one or two of his outnumbering opponents at a time due to being in a narrow fighting space. In this fight, they're out in the open. What you don't want to do is let yourself get surrounded on all sides, because unless you have eyes on the back of your head, you're not going to be able to see or block the sword swings coming at you from behind like what we see here. What you do want to do is engage all of your opponents with no fear while keeping the movement of the fight in your favor. We see Sir Arthur Dane advancing and retreating. When he's not letting himself get surrounded, this can be a great strategy. You want to be moving out of the range of some of your opponents so you can focus on one or two at a time while your other opponents struggle to get in range. Sir Arthur Dane brings the fight down from a 1-on-4 to a 1-on-1. The third thing on that list of things I've never seen in a real sword fight: spins. Spins and twirls. In the time it takes for you to do an unnecessary 360-degree spin, you can get slashed or stabbed in the back. Long sword, short sword, you're not doing a spin unless you want to die. I have to admit, this fight does look really choreographed, with every strike being fully followed through, meeting a block without a single strike missing or being feinted. Feints are when you make it look like you're swinging your sword from one direction before canceling the swing to see if your opponent reacts and flinches, creating an opening for you to strike somewhere else. In a real sword fight, you're not going to want to fully commit to every swing. Like I said before, after a fighter swings his sword is when he's most open. The fight wraps up with Ned Stark being disarmed and Sir Arthur Dane being stabbed in the back of the neck by the first guy he cut down. I really enjoyed these fights regardless of their levels of realism, and I'm hoping to see some great sword action in the final season of Game of Thrones. If you want to see more fight comparison videos, let me know, and let me know what your favorite fights of the series are. I got at least one more Game of Thrones video coming, so be on the lookout for that. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.